All right, welcome to another deep dive. We are diving into some pretty interesting prep material today. It looks like you're getting ready for a big presentation where you've got to present data insights to stakeholders.
Yeah, always a fun one.
Yeah, for sure. And you were smart enough to send over your business data analytics exam prep course material. So that's what we're going to be looking at today to help you prep.
Absolutely.
Cool. So, we're not trying to turn you into a full-blown data scientist or anything, right?
Right.
The goal here is to take what you've already learned in this course and figure out, how to really nail this presentation.
Yeah, how to make it stick.
Exactly, exactly. So I'm looking at the materials here, and one thing that really jumps out is this whole section on, what do they call it? Interpret and report results.
Yeah, that's a big one. And I think, for someone in your position, getting ready for this presentation, that's probably the most important piece, right? It's not just about understanding the data.
Right, yeah, because what's the point if you can't communicate it?
Exactly, exactly. So being able to take those numbers, take that data, and turn it into something meaningful, something that your stakeholders can actually use, that's the real magic. And that's where I think this course really shines.
Yeah, totally. So let's dig into that a little bit. How does this course actually approach that? Like turning data into insights. I mean, it's easy to say find the story, but are there like actual techniques or frameworks they give you?
There are. So, one thing that jumped out at me was this whole concept of data mining for narratives.
Oh, interesting. What is that?
So it's actually pretty cool. They walk you through different data mining techniques, the kind of stuff you might be familiar with from the course. But then, and this is where it gets interesting, they guide you on how to frame those discoveries as an actual narrative.
Oh, wow.
They even have some real-world examples showing how data points that might seem kind of dried on their own can actually be woven into, a compelling story.
That's really cool. So it's not just about finding those insights, it's about packaging them in a way that resonates with your audience, right?
Exactly. And they actually go a step further and talk about validating stakeholder understanding. They've got this really practical checklist in there that includes things like assessing your stakeholders' needs, their level of data literacy, what are they comfortable
Oh,
with,
that's smart.
the time frame they're working with, and even potential biases they might bring to the table.
Right. So before you even start digging into the data, you need to have a good understanding of who you're talking to and what they're looking for, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like, before you can tailor a suit, you got to take some measurements.
I like that analogy. So we've talked about understanding the audience. What about the actual communication piece? What kind of guidance does the course offer on that front?
Well, one thing they really emphasize is communication planning. So it's not just about that final presentation.
Right.
It's about building a relationship with your stakeholders through consistent, clear communication.
Ah, so it's more of an ongoing conversation rather than just like a one-time data dump.
Exactly, exactly. And they provide specific guidance on how to handle that communication. They suggest thinking about things like the level of detail your stakeholders need. Do they want the nitty-gritty or just the high-level overview?
Makes sense.
The format they prefer. Some people love a detailed report that some people just want a quick summary.
Bullet points, yeah.
Bullet points, exactly. And even how frequently they want to be updated. Some people want to be in the loop constantly. Some people just want the final results.
So it's like really treating data analysis as a collaborative process, right? You're bringing your stakeholders along on the journey.
Yeah, I love that way of putting it. They're partners in this, not just passive recipients of information.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about understanding your audience and planning your communication. What about the actual process of interpreting the data? Like what kind of insights can we glean from this course to help our listener with that step?
Well, the course lays out a really clear 5-step process for interpreting and reporting data. And what's great is that they don't just tell you what to do. They provide specific techniques and skills recommended by IBA for each step. So let's start with the first one, which, as we mentioned, is validating stakeholder understanding. Yeah, so this step is like setting the stage, right? It's all about making sure you're on the same page as your stakeholders from the get-go. The court actually highlights techniques like conducting stakeholder interviews, really sitting down with them, maybe doing some surveys or workshops to really gather information about their needs and goals. What are they hoping to get out of this data analysis? What are their expectations? It even suggests creating like a stakeholder register so you can keep track of all that.
So it's almost like you're creating a roadmap before you even start the journey.
Exactly, yeah. You want to make sure everybody's aligned from the beginning. And then you move on to the second step, which is planning stakeholder communication. This is where you take all that knowledge that you've gathered about your stakeholders and you start to craft your communication strategy.
Right, because different stakeholders might need different things, right?
Absolutely. The course actually suggests considering different communication channels. So, maybe for some stakeholders, a formal presentation is the way to go. For others, it might be more of a written report, or maybe it's dashboards, something really visual, or even, just informal meetings, depending on the audience.
I'm guessing this is where those data storytelling techniques come into play, right?
Absolutely. The course actually provides like a whole framework for crafting compelling data stories.
Oh, cool.
So they recommend starting with a clear problem statement, something that your audience can really connect with.
Okay, so it's like, what's the pain point that this data is going to address?
Exactly, yeah. And then, you use the data to highlight key trends and insights, but always, always relate those insights back to the problem and the potential solutions.
Okay, so it's not just about presenting numbers, it's about weaving them into a narrative, right?
Exactly. It's about creating a story that takes your stakeholders on a journey.
And ideally leads them towards a specific understanding or action, right?
Exactly. The course even suggests, using visuals like charts and graphs, but in a way that supports the narrative, not just as like standalone elements.
Oh, that's smart. Okay, so we've gotten clear on who we're talking to and how we're going to communicate with them. Now it's time to actually roll up our sleeves and get into the data itself.
Right. That's step 3, deriving insights from the data.
Okay, so this is where the real analysis happens. What kind of tools or techniques does the course recommend for that?
Well, they offer a whole toolbox of techniques, everything from basic descriptive statistics like means and medians to more advanced methods like regression analysis and cluster analysis.
Oh, wow, so they really cover a wide range. How do they suggest deciding which techniques to use?
Yeah, so obviously it depends on the type of data you have and the questions you're trying to answer.
Right.
The course actually provides a decision matrix, which is pretty handy, that helps you choose the right techniques based on, the nature of your data and your analytical goals.
Oh, that's awesome.
And they also, emphasize the importance of data cleaning and preparation.
Oh, yeah, garbage in, garbage out, right?
Exactly. You got to make sure your data is clean before you can really start to draw meaningful conclusions. And of course, they talk about validating your findings, making sure that your results are accurate and reliable.
That makes sense. So let's say you've done all that. You've cleaned your data, you've run your analysis, and you've uncovered those key insights. What's the next step?
All right, so now we're on to step 4, which is documenting and communicating findings. And this is where, a lot of people might just think, oh, it's time to write a report, right? But the course really emphasizes that this isn't just about creating some dry document. It's about presenting your insights in a way that is clear, concise, and engaging, something that your stakeholders can easily understand and act upon.
Okay, so this is where data visualization skills become really important, right?
Absolutely, yeah. The course actually has a whole section on data visualization best practices. So they talk about things like choosing the right chart type for your data, using clear labels and annotations, and avoiding clutter.
It seems like they're really pushing data professionals to think like designers almost, right?
Yeah, I love that. It's not just about the information, it's about how you present it visually.
Exactly. So are there any specific tips or tricks they offer on that front?
Well, they do. One thing they recommend is using a tool called a color palette. It's like a set of colors that are designed to work well together, to be easy on the eyes, and that can really make your visuals pop.
Oh, that's cool.
And then they also talk about templates and examples for creating, visually appealing dashboards and report.
Nice. So they give you some concrete tools to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're not just left hanging. They give you the resources to actually put these concepts into practice.
Okay, this is all incredibly helpful for our listener as they prep for their presentation. But what about the final step? How does the course address putting those insights into action?
Yeah, that's step 5, and this is where it gets really exciting. It's all about using your results to influence business decision making. So you're moving beyond just reporting findings, and you're getting into the realm of, strategic recommendations and action planning.
Okay, so it's about bridging that gap between data and action, right?
Exactly, yeah. And the course, they don't just leave you hanging, they give you guidance on how to do this.
Cool. What kind of guidance do they offer?
Well, for one, they talk about developing actionable recommendations based on your findings. So it's not just about saying, here's what the data shows. It's about saying, here's what we should do based on what we've learned. And they stress the importance of making sure that these recommendations align with the stakeholder goals.
Right, because otherwise, what's the point?
Exactly. You got to make sure that you're speaking their language, that you're addressing their priorities. And then, of course, you have to present those recommendations in a persuasive manner.
Right, because you're essentially trying to get buy-in, right?
Exactly. You're trying to convince them that your recommendations are the best course of action. And the course actually provides some really helpful tips on how to do that. Like how to frame your recommendations, how to clearly articulate the benefits and the potential impact.
So it's almost like they're training data professionals to be more than just analysts, right? They're empowering them to be strategic advisors almost.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about moving from the role of a data reporter to that of a data strategist.
Oh, I like that. So it's not just about crunching numbers. It's about influencing decisions and driving change within your organization.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's one of the most valuable takeaways from this course.
I agree. This entire framework seems incredibly valuable, not just for someone preparing for a presentation, but for anyone who works with data in a professional setting.
Absolutely. And it really gets to the heart of why data matters. It's not just about numbers, it's about using those numbers to make informed decisions and to drive positive change.
Speaking of driving change, the course also mentions something called data storytelling considerations. What exactly do they cover in that section?
Oh, yeah, this is where things get really interesting. They talk about how data storytelling goes beyond just presenting facts and figures. It's about crafting a narrative that brings the data to life.
So it's about adding that human touch, right? Making the data relatable.
Exactly. They talk about using things like metaphors and analogies and even personal anecdotes to connect with your audience on an emotional level.
That makes sense because sometimes data can feel very abstract, right?
Yeah, totally. So they give you some concrete examples of how to do this. Like instead of just saying customer satisfaction is down, you could tell a story about a frustrated customer who had a negative experience and then use data to show that this is actually a wider trend that's impacting the business.
Oh, that's a really good example.
Right. It takes something that might seem kind of dry and turns it into something that people can really grasp and relate to.
But I'm curious, isn't there a risk of oversimplifying things or even, manipulating data to fit a narrative?
That's a great question and a valid concern for sure. And the course actually addresses this directly. They really emphasize the importance of maintaining data integrity and avoiding bias. So, making sure that your story is grounded in facts and that you're not cherry picking data to support a predetermined conclusion.
Okay, good. Because you want to be compelling, but you also want to be ethical, right?
Exactly. And they even offer some practical tips for how to do that. Like one thing they suggest is involving multiple stakeholders in the storytelling process. So, getting different perspectives and challenging any potential biases.
Oh, that's smart. So it's like getting a checks and balances system in place.
Right, exactly. Because the more eyes you have on the data, the more likely you are to catch any blind spots or potential issues.
That's really reassuring to hear. It sounds like they're advocating for a responsible approach to data storytelling, one that combines creativity with ethical considerations.
Exactly, yeah. It's not just about telling a good story, it's about telling the right story.
Well said. It sounds like this course is just packed with gems for anyone who wants to become a more effective data communicator.
Absolutely. I mean, we've only just scratched the surface here, but there's so much good stuff in there. And I think one of the most valuable aspects is that it's not just theoretical. They actually give you practical exercises and examples to work with.
Oh, you mentioned some of those earlier, right? Like the narrow your audiences, exercise, and improve this table.
Yeah, those are great ones. And then there's another one called Harness Alignment and White Space, which is all about, using visual cues to guide your audience's attention. So it's kind of like designing your visualizations to make sure that the key takeaways really stand out.
That's cool. They sound really helpful, like a good way to bridge the gap between, learning the concepts and actually applying them.
Exactly. And they even have, feedback mechanisms built in so you can actually see how your skills are improving.
Oh, that's great. So it's not just about learning, it's about practicing and getting better.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, data storytelling is a skill. And like any skill, it takes practice.
Well said. It's amazing how much this course packs in. We've covered so much ground already. Understanding an audience, planning your communication, those 5 steps for interpreting and reporting data, and now this whole data storytelling piece. But before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to highlight? Any other key nuggets of wisdom that you want to leave our listener with as they prep for their presentation?
One more thing that really stuck with me from the course is that they talk about the importance of building trust and credibility as a data professional.
Oh, that's huge. Because data could be very powerful, but it's meaningless if people don't trust the source, right?
Exactly. Your credibility comes not just from the accuracy of your data analysis, but also from your communication skills, your transparency, and your ability to connect with your audience on a human level.
That's such a crucial point. It's about being both competent and relatable.
Exactly. And they give you some really practical advice on how to do that, like being upfront about any limitations in your data, not trying to hide anything, acknowledging different perspectives, and always being willing to explain your methodology. How did you arrive at these conclusions?
That's fantastic advice. Because it's about being honest and open, right? It's about showing your audience that you're not just trying to push an agenda, you're genuinely trying to help them understand the data and make informed decisions.
Exactly. It's about building that trust.
I love that. It really ties everything together. It's not just about the technical skills. It's about being an ethical and responsible data professional. Someone who can build relationships and inspire action.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This has been such an insightful dive into this course material. I feel like we've really unpacked the key takeaways and given our listener a solid foundation for their presentation.
Me too. I mean, we've covered a lot, but I think we've managed to distill the most essential insights and, hopefully made them feel a bit more confident and prepared.
Absolutely. And you know what? I think you've given our listener a fantastic starting point. But here's a final thought to chew on as they prep, okay? What if you go beyond that typical report format?
Ooh, I like where you're going with this.
Right. The course has given you all these amazing building blocks, interpreting the data, crafting a narrative, understanding your audience. Now, what if you took it a step further and incorporated some elements of data storytelling into the presentation itself?
You mean like instead of just slides with charts and graph, maybe weave in a personal anecdote that illustrates the problem that the data is highlighting?
Exactly. Or what if they created an interactive visualization? Something that lets their stakeholders explore the data themselves and draw their own conclusions.
Oh, that would be so cool. It would turn the presentation into more of an experience, more engaging and collaborative.
And it really drives home that point that data isn't just about numbers, it's about insights and stories.
And action. Ultimately, it's about driving action.
Exactly. Well, listener, I think we've given you a lot to think about today. From the nitty-gritty of data interpretation to, the art of storytelling and the power of using data to actually drive change. I'm so glad we could take this deep dive together.
Me too. And I'm so excited to see what our listener comes up with. I know they're going to rock this presentation.
I have no doubt. So, listener, it's time for you to take the reins and craft your data story. And remember everything we've talked about today, but don't be afraid to experiment. Get creative. Let your passion shine through.
And remember, we're here cheering you on every step of the way.
That's a wrap for today's deep dive. Until next time, happy diving.